And one of the partners here is Sterling Seacrest. I know everybody in this room, but I'm not sure I know everybody online, so bear with me. For those who don't know us well, we're a multidisciplinary commercial insurance agency with deep industry verticals in a number of spaces: healthcare, construction, real estate and hospitality, transportation and logistics, nonprofits, and we also do help folks with their own personal insurance and risk management. So your homeowners, your personal liability, your auto liability, all of that good stuff. If we're not doing business with you currently, we would love to be. So please reach out if we can help. We're really excited to be putting this program on. This is one of the sort of hottest topics in the insurance space the last several years. Everybody's been touched by auto and fleet issues. The industry's been getting hammered with auto claims. The liability results, if you take these things to court, is spiraling upward. I've got charts on this I'm going to be sharing with my team. The statistics on this are not good. The carriers have been responding with price increases and trying to raise sensitivity around this issue in terms of training and distraction and all those good things, but it's really becoming a hot spot in your risk management program. If you've got fleet vehicles, if you've got heavy vehicles on the road, it's absolutely top topic for most of the folks on the call and in the room. So we're really pleased that you can make some time for us today. And we're real excited to have Kevin Colton with us to speak about it. He's with HB Next. HB Next is a broadly diverse company that specializes in training of all sorts, safety training of all sorts, including OSHA, fleet. They're also doing craft training. They've got tools to help you with compliance and tracking your training. And they regularly put on all kinds of programs at their own office in Lawrenceville. And Kevin just recently joined them to expand their offerings in fleet and heavy vehicle safety. He's got a 20-year career in law enforcement, 10 of which were spent enforcing advanced traffic law for the state of Georgia. The last several years, he's been doing consulting in the private sector and just recently joined with HB Next. We're very pleased to have him here. So join me in welcoming Kevin Colton.
Thank you.
It's the best.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Like Doug was saying, HB has recently been broadening and seeing the need for companies that have fleet vehicles and commercial vehicles. My specialty is really on the fleet and all the commercial vehicles. If you operate underneath a DOT number, you see that the laws and rules and regulations on the federal side of that are changing. Every 6 months a new law comes in. Typically every January and every July, new set of laws and regulations come in if you're operating underneath a DOT number. That's another big example of that is coming January 6th of this year, if you operate underneath the DOT number, is the drug clearinghouse goes into effect. A lot of companies that I've been speaking to the last several months have been unaware of it, and they're, Kevin, what's going on? What is the drug clearinghouse? Trying to get everybody informed on that. A company has to register along with all their CDL holders also have to be registered on that. But once again, it's one of those sections that you really have to keep up to date on, and we try to specialize on that. And with my background and everything, I try to help companies the best that we can. Today, what we're going to talk about is the DOT, the fleet safety and compliance, really specifically how CSA can affect your company and your drivers. And in turn, how does that go down to your insurance carrier and the people that are providing you with your rates and everything. So what does CSA stand for? CSA is Compliance, Safety, and Accountability. This was a program that was started by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Alliance. It was actually started and had been in the works ever since 2011. And a lot of people are like, holy cow, I didn't know it was going on that long. Who is FMCSA? What is CSA? CSA in your company, and really, how does it affect you? I get a lot of drivers, a lot of companies. Okay, it's another program that the federal government has, but how is it specifically going to affect me as a company and the drivers that I have on board for me? So if you're not aware, FMCSA, and we'll refer to this a lot throughout the presentation, what stands for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. It's your federal agency that basically regulates and oversees your DOT, issues all your rules and regulations. The industry on truck and bus companies, your commercial vehicles, technically any commercial vehicle that is listed at 10,001 pounds, your gross vehicle weight rating, and is used for a business, interstate or intrastate, falls underneath these guidelines. So if you have a single vehicle and it is a moving van for a moving company or a landscape company or a construction company or a mechanical company, even though your driver isn't required to have a CDL, but this vehicle's weight rating is over 10,001 pounds, you now fall underneath those DOT guidelines. Recently, I looked at some statistics. There is roughly right around over 5 million commercial trucks and drivers, that sort, kind of out on the public roadway, compared to over 250 million cars. So it's a big comparison, especially those of us here in Atlanta. We know how the traffic is. You get out on the interstate, and the last thing any of us want to do is what? Be behind that big truck because they're holding us up or they're in the wrong lane. And what happens? We get the aggressive driving, and then it affects our drivers on the commercial side. And now we start talking about defensive driving because we get a little bit of road rage, we get the speed, we throw a little weather into it, and now we start having accidents. What is CSA? The Federal Motor Carrier Safety, it's a data-driven safety compliance and enforcement program. So the federal government looked at this back in 2011 and wanted to put a program together to really hold companies and drivers more responsible for violations. And what they did, they came up with this program and assigned every violation kind of a point system. And this point system is based on the violations. And as we'll talk further in the presentation, you'll see how these points can affect the company and the driver in multiple ways. And a lot of this will trickle down even to a carrier's insurance. Depending on the type of freight or the type of company you actually operate, some of our big freight companies, your over-the-road companies, so to say, a lot of those companies, the freight that they move, certain companies won't ship with a carrier if their CSA rating is too high, because that's based on their on-time performance, their accidents, the type of drivers they employ, and they may say to that company, you're going to have a safety rating or CSA score of minimum 65 or whatever their threshold is before they'll actually do business with that carrier. So that's another part that's very important. As a company standpoint, you want to keep your CSA score down. It's designed to really overall improve the safety and prevent commercial motor vehicle crashes. And a lot of that is intervention with the federal and the state government to try to come in and see if a company is having problems and that score is going up. They start sending out warning letters to you saying, hey, you have a high crash number, unsafe driver, or hazmat issues. They kind of want to get that warning level to you so they can make you aware and see what you have on place to try to keep your score down.
So does anybody that has a DOT number get a CSA rating?
Anybody, the question is, anybody that has a DOT number, are you affected on the CSA? Yes. any CDL holder is affecting their license and you as a company on the CSA score. We'll get into the scoring system here in a few minutes, but how does those scores, how are they assigned or given to a company and a driver? And that's going to be when you're stopped or actually inspected out on the roadside or at a scale house.
We have a lot of clients who hire hauling contractors.
Okay.
So this is publicly available information, correct?
Correct. We're going to talk about the 7 basic categories on CSA, and everything is public to any company that wants to research about any other company other than the crash rating. The crash rating is actually private. So if you researched Walmart, you could see their rating and their inspections and everything, but there's a couple categories that are private and it's only available to that company specific, and that's the crash rating and the hazmat. CSA in your company. So how is your score computed? Your company is assessed points for any violation. The violation is listed under one of the 7 SMS categories that we have. Your company will maintain those points up to 24 months. A driver is assessed those points for 36 months or 3 years. Each year, a set of points will drop off. And I'm going to give an example because it gets a little confusing for people to kind of follow here. So example, we're just going to say a driver is stopped on a roadside inspection. He does not have a current or a good medical card on his person at the time of the stop. The officer doesn't write him a ticket, but does put it down on his DOT inspection report, listing the company, your vehicle, and the driver. That violation specifically carries 8 CSA points. Any violation under CSA that is out of service carries an additional 2 points. So what we would have here is the violation for no medical card worth 8 points. It's an out of service violation. So there's an additional 2 points. So the total score for that violation on that driver is going to be 10 points. Okay? Now, because the driver was assigned that, he's going to get that 10 points times 3 for a total of 3 years. That's going to be on his record for a total of 30 CSA points. The company's also assigned that, except for 2 years, for 20 CSA points. That's how your point system builds up.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
So the driver, is this only for drivers with CDLs, or is it for any driver who's driving a vehicle with a DOT number?
Any driver that's falling underneath the DOT number on a commercial vehicle stop.
Okay.
Typically what you're going to see, you could have a local or county jurisdiction stop them and give them a warning. But specifically, if you operate underneath a DOT number, you've seen what we called an Aspen report or a DOT inspection report. That comes in. That is going underneath the DOT number. You could actually, real quick, an example would be, you could actually have a moving company operating a single vehicle at 18,000 pounds. He still can drive that with a Class C, but he's operating it under my son's moving company. If he was stopped, falls under the DOT rules and regulations, and yes, he would be assigned that, along with the company that operates under that DOT number. So our driver received 1 violation for no medical card. We know that it's 10 points. We know he's going to carry that for 3 years. Our company now is going to carry that for 2 years. So how do we get rid of our points? A lot of companies want to know, how do I get better? Maybe I had a bad driver and he had a couple things and I addressed the issue. I got a good program in place, but how do I get my points back and how do I start to improve? So the example up here, each year on the violation anniversary. So if I received my no medical card on today's date, I have my 30 points. Next year on November of 2020, 10 of those points will drop off, leaving me with 20 points. The same with the company. The same amount drops off for the company. My next anniversary date on November of 2021, another 10 points drops off, dropping the company down to 10, dropping my driver down to 20, and then our third year, so on and so on. 2022, now we will be at 0 points. So a lot of people like to ask, well, how can I improve that? Because 2 years or 3 years for a driver or a company, that's kind of a long time for me to try to get back in, especially if I have a lot of drivers. Because if I have a lot of drivers and I had multiple violations, my points could really get up there. Yes, if you get clean violations, that will help your score. So I like to say for every bad violation we get, we almost want to have at least 3 or 4 clean violations or clean inspection reports that's going to help our rating, because what does that do? It kind of balances out the number of stops, the number of vehicles. The other thing the FMCSA does is they put you into a classification based on the number of vehicles and employees that you operate under. So if you're familiar with your DOT number, your MCS 150, that's when you update the number of power equipments and drivers that you have, and possibly how you obtain your IFTA stickers at the end of the year based on that. That's the classification they're actually putting you into. So you're not based on 5 accidents and you have 25 people in the same classification as you may with JB Hunt and some of your multiple huge interstate carriers. Now, a little bit, I want to talk about our drivers. Raising your company's safety standards. CSA has really 3 main elements. The safety measurement system, improve how FMCSA prioritizes carriers for interventions. That's a little bit what I'm talking about on the size of your company and what group you're in. Maybe classified like 0 to 25 power units for your company, or 25 to 150, and so on and so on. Includes more safety data. All the safety is based on violations found during roadside inspections. And when we say roadside inspections, this includes whether they're stopped on the side of the road by the trooper or state agency, or being pulled into a scale house, typically out on your interstate. They organize the safety behaviors into 7 behavior categories, and we're going to show that in just a second. Intervention process. When your score gets up to a certain level, typically 75 and higher, the feds or the state will send you to the company a warning letter telling you, hey, you have a high number of crashes, your CSA score is really getting up there. And it's kind of that warning letter. And the last one I seen that was worded was, you have a high number of driver in the unfitness category, and we're getting ready to come in and do an audit. That's how a DOT company, typically this is respond to. You think, oh, the state's coming in, they're getting ready to do an audit. The intervention process, when they do this, really what the program was designed for was to bring it to the forefront of the company that, hey, you're having some problems here. Even though you may realize it, the feds have now recognized it also. They're coming in and they want to see what type of programs you have in place. Hey, do you have a defensive driving program? Do you have drive cam or accident items on your vehicle? What type of programs do you offer to your drivers and your employees? How often do you do your training? They'll also ask you, how is your hiring practices? What type of drivers are you hiring? What does your drug program look like? And it just kind of goes down. It starts with the office on the on-site audit. And if the state and the feds start to see some violations here, what typically happens? We dig a little bit further. So if I say, what is your drug program for random drug testing? How does that involve your drivers? And I ask you to show me your federal regulation sheet that you have to show me how you do your random drug testing. And you say, oh, I don't have that. Then they're going to start looking, what else don't you have in your system? That's a lot of things that you really need to keep on to, because in the event of an audit, that's the type of things that they're going to look at. And then they're going to tie that back into possibly your accident ratings, or in one of those categories that you received that warning letter from the state. Safety fitness determination, your current safety rating process requires an on-site investigation. If you just had a large number of motor vehicle accidents under your DOT number, and really where it's going to start looking and getting you into trouble is if we have a large number of injuries, serious injuries and or death related on those. Obviously, that's all tying back in to your insurance carrier, but the state's going to come in and really want to look at what are you doing to prevent this. And if everybody is aware, on your DOT number, that is one of the things on a company side running a business. The feds can come in, or the state can come in on that DOT and conduct an audit. And if they find enough serious violations at that time, they can actually shut your doors that day for operating underneath that DOT number. It's one of the very few things operating under a business that, hey, if they determine you're really having a lot of issues and fines, they can shut or pull your DOT operating authority right then. So it's very important to stay on that. And a lot of people don't realize that. The safety measurement system, it helps FMCSA and the carriers for interventions. We want to have that intervention, the state and the federal carriers, they want to have that intervention before it gets to that point where you're being fined and or suspended from your operating authority. SMS results are updated once per month based on the prior 24 months. So if you remember when I was talking about your CSA score for a company, how we were assigned our CSA points, it stayed on our record for 2 months. Every month, or I try to tell companies and carriers that you should be checking on the FMCSA under your DOT number. You should really be checking that once a week, because I like to make sure that a company is aware of what's going on with their record, seeing what's dropping off or what is new on their record, in case they have a driver that was actually stopped and inspected and failed to notify you. And that's, believe it or not, that's very common. Oh, I forgot to let you know the other day. So it's important for you to understand how your safety performance affects your carrier's results. Safety violations will affect your company's SMS results for the 2 years, drivers for 3. Violations are recorded on the roadside inspections. So when you look on your DOT report or your underneath the Federal Motor Carrier website, and you see your DOT number and you see all your inspections, each month, typically it runs from about the 24th to the 28th each month is when it updates. So if you have bad CSA points on there or a bad roadside inspection, at your 2-year mark, anniversary on that, you will see that inspection drop off of your history. That's how you can kind of keep track of, geez, what violations are up on my record. These are the 7 categories. Learn your basics. Your safety performance affects you and your company. This is also something that is becoming very involved with your insurance carriers. I will say they've always been involved in it, but they're really looking at these kind of items, and they're pulling this information when they're looking at your rates and some other items. Our first one is unsafe driving. What is our unsafe driving? That is going to be all driver related. Your drivers that have a speeding, improper lane usage, following too close, anything that was involved in your accident, anything that is an actual driver out on the road that affects his, basically the reason he was stopped for. Crash indicator, as you can see, that's non-public. Crash indicator is exactly what it says. That's going to be all your accidents involved. What is considered an accident under the DOT? Anything that's going to be out on your public roadway that law enforcement has to come to and take a report and respond to. Just a little side note on the crash indicator. Make sure if you're operating underneath a DOT number that you're maintaining a 3-year accident registry for your company. That is very important. I used to see that a lot on audits, that a company would be like, what is an accident registry? And it's also something that insurance companies and attorneys, in the event of a lawsuit or something, they're going to also want to see those type documents. Your next one, hours of service, that's going to be for any of our carriers that are operating under your logbook. Anybody that's crossing the state line or going past that 150 air miles. Vehicle maintenance, any of your maintenance. Your driver is stopped, lights, tires, brakes. That's why it's good to have a good maintenance program in effect. Controlled substance, your alcohol and drugs. Commercial motor vehicle, the federal law states you cannot have any alcohol in the power unit of any commercial vehicle, even if it's sealed or not. Has to be in a controlled compartment or in your cargo area. If they get caught for having even an unopened bottle of alcohol in the power unit, that is going to be 10 CSA points. And that's one of those categories that the feds are really going to look, that if you have a high number of those violations, you're definitely going to get a warning letter on that. Especially the way all the controlled and uncontrolled narcotics and opioids and everything are on play now. They're really hitting commercial companies hard on that. Hazardous materials, if you have anything on the hazmat side, typically I see that with our construction companies with some of our oil and fuel tankers. And then our last one is going to be driver fitness. Driver fitness is going to be your driver's license and your medical card. That's that rating. It's really important to make sure we have a system in place that our drivers make sure they get their CDL or their driver license renewed when they're supposed to, medical card, and any endorsements or restrictions they have on either one of those items. Typically what we would see is a driver is required to wear corrective lenses. He's stopped on a DOT inspection and he doesn't have his glasses on. That's a big one. It's going to be out of service. It can be corrected at the scene if the driver just puts his glasses on. But they're typically, the trooper's going to write that up, and that's another one of those big 10 CSA points for a total of 30, 20 on you. The other one on that is if you have a driver and he does not marry up his medical card with his driver's license. And what do I mean by marrying that up? If you're on the HR side, you're very familiar with when they receive a new medical card, they have to take the medical card to the DMV office. When they take that to the DMV office, they'll input the information, and now what the law says is when I was running a driver out on the roadside, I run his driver's license. I not only got his driving history, but I also could see if his medical card was valid at the time of the stop. If it is not valid at the time of the stop and the driver does not have it on his person to verify that, I can place him out of service. And that's one of those big hits that's going to really hit the company and the driver.
And that's for drivers even if they're not CDL.
Correct, because you may be required to have a medical card because of the type of vehicle you're operating, but not having a CDL.
Does that come into play like when you're attaching a trailer and you're changing the gross vehicle weight beyond what the main vehicle is? Because we do have a lot of contractors who haul little trailers with stuff
Right.
that, pushes them over the vehicle weight limit, I think.
Correct. And here's the way that is looked at. Without getting confused, always look at your power unit. When I say your power unit, that is going to be the actual vehicle you're driving. That vehicle, it has a weight rating of 10,001 pounds, and I put my name and a DOT number under the side of it, then everything falls under the DOT guidelines, from the driver to the equipment. So yes, he would still need the medical card regardless of what type of trailer or anything I put on there. The only time the trailer is going to affect me as a company and a driver is going to be based on the weight, and that is going to affect my actual driving license. Whether I go from a Class C, like all of us typically have for our motor vehicle, to a Class B, B is in Bravo, which is our power unit, which is a straight truck, but over 26,001 pounds. I like to tell everybody that's like your single dump truck. Class B can drive that, but as soon as I put a large enough trailer on the back of that dump truck, 10,001 pounds or greater, that moves me from a B to a Class A. And it has nothing to do with what I actually have on the trailer. The way the states and the feds look at that is I'm strictly going by your VIN plate on that piece of equipment. So if your truck has 45,000 pounds weighted for the power unit, the dump truck, and the trailer is completely empty, and you say, oh, well, this trailer isn't 10,001 pounds. I'm looking strictly at the VIN plate, and that's how it's determined. This is a sample carrier. This is typically what you would see if you logged in to FMCSA as a carrier. You're going to get registered. You can see our example up here is ABC Trucking. You would have all your information in the upper left-hand corner. That is also a good place to start to make sure that you're updated with your current information. Typically, that goes into your MCS 150. You want to make sure that the number of vehicles and drivers correspond to what you're actually operating under. Next, your safety rating, out of service, national average is on the right. Your average based on the number of inspections that you have been conducted on is typically where you're at. The national average right now for the vehicle side is running about 21%. And on drivers, the national average is running about 23%. So that just simply meant that about 1 out of every 4 traffic stops that I conducted on a commercial truck, I would either have the driver and or the vehicle, I would have a violation where I could place them out of service. That's actually a quite high when you stop and think about how many vehicles are out there. That's why it's so important to do the little things with your company and your driver, simply by having a system in place that monitors their expiration of their driver's license and medical card. We could be placed out of service just because we didn't have the right document with us or we forgot to send him to get a renewal. Or a vehicle that we don't have the right maintenance program in effect, and he gets stopped, and the trooper determines that he has a missing turn signal out on the back of his truck, and that's an out-of-service violation. So the little things like that are what we really have to stay on, and if you operate more than just a couple vehicles, you know, that's not something you can do just once a week. You have to stay on these drivers every single day. And I like to tell companies, you know, everybody right now with the economy and everything, we all look at it, it's kind of a driver's market. What do I mean by a driver's market? drivers really have the luxury, if they have a clean record in CDL and a little bit of experience, they can kind of pick and choose where they want to go. Now, there may be some technical sides to it based on job skills for something they do outside of the vehicle. But really, if we're in the market and we have to hire CDL drivers, we probably all would agree it's hard to get a good driver. And then once we get that driver, what type of programs and items do we have in place? Because we typically see if we're going to lose a driver, we lose them in the first 90 days. If I can keep that driver past 90 days, usually I'm going to have them for at least a year or so, you know? So I like to really look at with companies, what do we have in place? How are we having them come on board? Are we doing the right orientation, the right training, the right notification of, hey, something happened out on an inspection? Well, what can we learn from it? On the next, you'll kind of see on our categories, the carrier measurement over time. We'll have our 2-year period, and you'll kind of see a graph on that when you click on the next page when you're looking at your own specific DOT number, and you can kind of see how your rating is going up and down. CSA and your safety record. Your safety performance keeps everyone safe on the road. Your performance is part of your company's record, so your safety compliance means a lot. It's up to you to ensure the safety record is accurate. When I start talking about making sure your record is accurate, that's why I was telling you a little bit earlier that you should be checking on the federal side. You should be looking at your record, I like to say, once a week at minimum. The state, your driver has your state MVR. That's going to be his driving history. And then a PSP record could be something if some companies typically will go through a third party. And when I say a third party, when they're doing their hiring process, they'll go through a third party that will actually do your driving history, your MVR, any of their accidents and everything. And you get this report back before you actually bring that driver on board. A lot of things to consider when you're bringing a driver on board, especially if they're going to operate the commercial vehicle. Should also be speaking with your insurance carrier on some disqualifications that some carriers under your policy won't allow. DUIs, prior drug convictions, prior accidents. I've seen it everything from if they've been convicted on cell phone use while driving a commercial motor vehicle, that there's a 1-year time limit before they can be hired, because that's falling so big as distracted driving. And what happens if we're out there on the interstate and we got one of our commercial drivers texting or looking at his phone, and all of a sudden we run into the back of traffic on 285? The cost on that and everything can be just huge for us. A closer look at your safety information, state MVRs. If you're operating under a DOT number, we need to have a signed release by our prospective employee, along with we need to do a 3-year MVR on that driver. That needs to then be put in our DQ file. Our DQ file for the DOT is going to be your commercial vehicle drivers. It's your driver qualification. I'm sorry, I didn't want to confuse you. Once a year, typically in December, we will have that driver sign his yearly compliance, where he will list any tickets or accidents he may have occurred for that year. When he signs that release, you then have to run his MVR again and compare that with what he's placed down on his annual certification of accidents or tickets. So you need to run the MVR in the release when they're first brought on board, then once a year at the end of the year, and that has to be put in their record. That's a good time as a company to make sure you look at what occurred on a driver's record, because he may have had some tickets throughout the year that you were unaware of, but in his personal vehicle. I recently was working with a company that the driver had no problems at work, but when they ran the MVR, guess what they found out? His commercial status was suspended. His license wasn't suspended, but his commercial status was suspended. Why? He had 2 super speeder tickets in the year driving his little Ford Mustang.
Are you familiar with the subscription service you can get that monitors the MVR? Because we've actually been recommending that as a better alternative, because it'll ping you with violations when they occur, and not just, you do it once a year and you find out.
Correct.
That's one snapshot in time. It could go to hell the next day and you're not aware of it for 364 days. Whereas this service, it's a little more expensive, but in terms of value back, we think it's probably worth it if you've got enough driver exposure.
It is, especially depending on the relationship you have with your carrier, your insurance carrier, that they get this notification whenever a driver receives, typically it's when they're convicted of a ticket, because you can receive a ticket, and I'm going to talk about that in 1 second here. You can receive a ticket, but it's not going to go down on your MVR until an actual conviction comes in place. So do we have something in place, depending on the number of drivers, do we have something in place that can monitor us so we make sure we don't get in trouble and all of a sudden the driver's giving us a call one day saying he got stopped driving our commercial vehicle and his CDL is suspended because, I thought I paid that ticket that I got in my car. So yes, it's another safe measurement, and it's important. On a side note on that, do we have the correct policies in place with our drivers on orientation and throughout the year that we tell them, hey, anytime you receive a ticket for anything, driving your personal car or work vehicle, you must notify company or supervisor within 24 hours so you can document that and also look at it.
Another thing we would add is that we recently saw a carrier who basically was rejecting auto risks if there were too many citations for cell phone use, and they sort of withdrew. They kind of came back off that position, but we can see a day if the following too close continues at the pace that it has been, and the distraction continues to be the prominent concern, which I expect that. We could see a day when the carrier community will say those are serious violations, and they will make us, they're going to draw a line in the sand on those and consider that almost as damning as a DUI, because the loss activity arising from these following too close, because you get cited at the scene, it's your fault. If somebody alleges soft tissue injury, the claims payments on those liability claims are going through the roof. There's a term that's been coined, and you're going to hear this going forward. It's called social inflation. And what they're talking about is just liability payouts. If they go to court when the at-fault parties are insured, or the carrier's insured, they're just inflating way beyond the level that you would expect. And so that's got to be forced back into the rates. So essentially the reward you get from being safe is it's becoming more, it's becoming more significant. In other words, the penalty for violation is you're getting hammered. And so, staying clean has got the opportunity cost of that is going up. So, the return on any investment in safety, whether it be, software or tools in the cab or training, the return on those investments is going up, and will continue to go up as far as we can see.
Okay, thank you. It's very important, and I recently, just on a side note with what Doug was talking about, was with about a 50 vehicle construction company, and they had a great rating in rates and everything for about 8 years. This last year, they've had 2 major accidents. One of them was a single vehicle accident where a dump truck, the driver, for whatever reason, they believe he was probably on a cell phone. He left the roadway, overturned the dump truck, and he was critically injured. He got nailed on that. In turn, how does that roll back down? Because now we lost about $120,000 piece of equipment. We had some major injuries to that driver, and the insurance really went up on them. And some of the things they were looking at is our hiring practices and our safety programs that we had in place. And they essentially didn't have anything in place, unfortunately. And when I talked to the owner and some of the supervisors, they said, well, we talk to our drivers every day. We have shop talk. We put this up. Sometimes it's really good to think about this. Can we do it in a different manner? Because drivers, typically, they hear the same person in the same way over and over, and they just kind of, yeah, okay, Johnny's telling me to put my seatbelt on. But I like to come into companies and I like to ask you, what have we changed up a little bit different? How are we getting that message out and maybe catching and sparking that eye of a driver, changing things just a little bit? Maybe it could be something as easy as putting a drive board up at the time clock, and each week I put a new message up there. I will use 3 points of contact getting in and out of my vehicle every day. I will put my cell phone away my family depends on it. Think of little things like that. Little incentive programs. We're always telling a driver, you need to do this, this, and this, or you're not doing this. But as a company, do we also lead by example? If I tell my drivers to put their cell phone down and put their seatbelt on every day, or get onto them whenever I have a bad inspection, how am I leading that? By, if I get in my car or in my truck at a job site or in the parking lot, and the first thing I do is pick up my cell phone as I'm driving out of the parking lot and my driver sees that. Kind of think about those type of things. We want to lead by example on a lot of this. So the MVR, just to recap on that, when they come on board, they sign their release, we run their MVR, we insert it into their DQ file. Once a year, typically in December, because I want to run it for that fiscal year, I'm going to run it, check the release, put that into their record. If you have a program that you can work with through your insurance carrier that monitors that throughout the year where you can keep on, it definitely is well worth the money that's spent, because you don't want to take that chance of a driver getting caught on a suspended. And typically, if they didn't take care of a ticket, what we'll see is a failure to appear along with the previous violation. And then what I do, I impounded the vehicle and I took your driver to jail. Typically on a commercial truck, I know at least in the metro Atlanta area, a commercial truck is going to run you about $500 for the tow bill, probably missing the driver and your equipment for the job site. And how does that roll downhill with what you were doing on the job at that time? That $500 just on the tow bill, geez, if I would have divided that up over the course of the year, or what it was going to cost me to have that random program in place, paid for it one time. The PSP record is pre-employment screening tool that allows carriers and drivers to purchase a federal inspection and crash history. It's 5 years on your accidents, 3 years on DOT inspections. So if that driver holds a CDL, you're going to see any DOT inspection, good or bad, you're going to see what he had for the last 3 years. And that's important, because if you're hiring a driver and you say, well, I run his MVR, but he didn't have any tickets. It's very common now that DOT will list the violations, but he's not getting a hard copy on the ticket where he has to go to court and pay a fine. So if all we ran was the MVR, we would never know really what was on the DOT record. So if you have a driver and he's got 6 inspections over the course of the last 3 years, now you can look at those inspections and see the type of violations he had. And you can somewhat pretty well get a good idea that, hey, he's getting caught for tires and brakes or tires and lights. Is that really 100% my maintenance program? Or was that a driver that was getting in a truck and he wasn't doing his pre-trip like he should have every day? Where he's probably what I like to typically classify him as a turnkey driver. And a turnkey driver for me is that driver that gets out there, he turns his lights on, he walks around, he kicks a tire, and in 30 seconds he's back in the vehicle, he turned the key and he's going down the road. He's not doing what he needs to do that is required. Your PSP record does not directly impact your CDL, and a carrier may only access the PSP record with your consent. That means at the time of hiring, you have to sign a release. That driver has to sign a release. Anymore, your drivers are having to sign about a half a dozen different releases for different forms and things that you need to do. Everything from their drug testing to their MVR to their PSP to coming up January 6th on the clearinghouse. Ensuring the accuracy of your information, state information, your citation and tickets, federal information. I like to say, and I'm going to admit this, I can now, law enforcement, they're humans too. They make mistakes. I would have never said that the last 20 years that I was ever going to make a mistake out on the road and everything I did was 100% accurate. But we make mistakes. We get in a hurry. We read something wrong on a driver's license. I read something wrong off my laptop. It's very possible that that officer could have made an error. It's important when our driver notifies us of an inspection and or a ticket that we review those documents. If you're not sure how to review those documents, make sure that you really get with somebody that knows how to do that. Remember this, if you receive a DOT violation and the driver receives a ticket, if he goes to court, after he completes the process, if that ticket is dismissed or he's found not guilty, we take that information from our court system, and then what we're going to do what we call data queue. That means we'll go back into the FMCSA website, we'll challenge the violation that was written. There's a little bit of a process. We'll submit the supporting documents with that, and in turn, that will remove that off of our record and our CSA score, not only for the driver, but for the company. So it's very important to read our documentation. I recently had a driver whose CDL was suspended because driving a commercial vehicle, he received a speeding ticket for 15 over the posted speed limit. You don't lose your license, but on the CDL, if convicted, you will lose the CDL privileges, typically anywhere from 30 to 90 days, just depends on his record. Come to find out, they had entered it into the court system incorrectly. And when I read the ticket, it wasn't a super speeder for 15 over. What it was 14 over, but the officer had wrote it in the comments what he had actually clocked the guy at. He was essentially giving the CDL driver a break, saying, I got you on this, you could lose your CDL, but I'm going to bump it down so you don't. But what we typically would do, the reason I wrote that into the comments like that is because if I had a driver that would kind of try to pull a fast one and come to court and think the officer wasn't going to be there and I'm going to get my ticket dismissed, I had the comments in there, and a lot of the judges will read that and say, no, even the officer said he cut you a break, he got you on laser at 3,000 feet, calibrated everything, and then you end up really getting stuck with a fine. So read that, read your state tickets. The other one is typically a CDL driver gets a speeding ticket, it's 15 over. you don't want him to just pay the ticket because he'll get the CDL suspended, right? So now we want to work with him. Hey, you're going to have to go to court on this. Maybe print out your MVR. Maybe get a letter from our safety department stating, hey, he's a good driver. He's been in good standing for the last 5 years with no true tickets or accidents. His job depends on this. If he gets convicted, he's going to lose his CDL. Most all the time, the court system will reduce it so that CDL holder does not lose his job. That's not the goal in it. They're going to probably still get caught with a fine, and it's going to cost them some pretty good money, but they're going to work with it. But it's important as a company and our driver, make sure we read what our violation is. Make sure we take the correct documents. If we need be, we can data queue it. You register, you usually pull the state or the federal charge up. We send pictures in, we send documents from the court saying it was dismissed, and then you'll get a review. Those reviews are usually conducted by the state and the officer that wrote the violation, and you will get a response typically within 7 days. Just a side note on the data queues, if you challenge a lot of violations on your company, the state has a list, and they know every time you challenge a violation. So if you want to be one of those people that, ooh, I'm going to challenge this, I'm going to challenge this, I'm going to challenge it, it kind of shows a track record, and you want to be mindful of really what you're going to data queue and challenge to try to get it reversed, because they may think that you're just really trying to pull a fast one all the time. Adjudicated citations policy, once again, this went into effect, and this is on the federal side, so it's saying that if you go to court after receiving a ticket and you're found not guilty or the ticket is dismissed, that we can turn that in on the data queue and get that removed. That's important, especially on certain categories like our unsafe driving and our driver fitness and or drugs and alcohol. If we won that violation in court and it was overturned and we're not guilty, really need to turn it in. Non-government and safety information, third party and carriers evaluating the drivers. Carriers and independent third parties combine the PSP and other driver information, call it the CSA score, CSA driver scorecard. The federal government does not endorse any of these third party. A driver can always see what their CSA score is by simply registering on FMCSA website, and they can actually see it themselves free of charge. So if you have a driver that's really wanting to know what his CSA score, you can either walk him through or just tell them to go to the FMCSA website in that portal, and they might have to do a little bit of navigating, but they can really find that information out for them. Get road smart. You know, it's really important to, I can't stress enough that the companies that I've worked with, both on the law enforcement side and on a sense, the private sector, that the companies, we just overlook not having the right programs in place until we get in trouble. Whether I get a phone call, my insurance rates just went up an extra $150,000 this year because of some accidents, or I get that notification letter from the state saying, hey, I'm getting ready to come in and audit you because of a high number of accidents or a high number of violations under unsafe driving. And then we say, oh my gosh, I need to crack down. I need to get on my drivers. What am I doing? But if we can have the right preventive measures in place and put the right things for hiring the qualified drivers, qualified office staff, supervisors, I don't know how many drivers I can go to and ask them, do the correct pre-trip and defensive driving and put your cell phone down. They're all aware of it. But as soon as I take a shop foreman or a job site foreman and say, hey, when was the last time you know, he really does a good job, but when was the last time we just kind of followed back behind him, seeing that he did a good job, and we told him, hey, I just want to tell you thank you today. Why? What did I do? I just want to say you're wearing your work boots, you had your safety equipment on, and I watched you and you did a good pre-trip on your tractor. I'm telling you, these drivers, that goes a long way with them. It really does. But think of these type of programs that we can be doing. Maybe just a different message that we have out there. Up here, I have a few websites that are listed. Getting Connected, Driver Safety Education, all these are on the federal sites. I do want to caution that you get out there on the internet and you type in something. There are tons of websites out there anymore that want to give you information. Be mindful of the information that you're getting. Research it. Make sure you're going to the right websites. Not saying anybody has the wrong stuff out there, but a third party may misguide you or direct you maybe more towards them, and because it's a money thing where they're, oh, run everything through us, we'll handle it all for you. And then at the end of the day, we end up having an audit and you're missing something. And it's like, oh, well, this is what I heard over there. Check things out on the federal DOT websites. One last thing I really want to talk about real quick that's coming up is the Drug Clearinghouse program on FMCSA. If anybody is not aware, I want you to go to FMCSA/clearinghouse. FMCSA/clearinghouse. Go to that website. It is, believe it or not, the federal government did a good job on this. It's a very user-friendly portal and will answer all your questions and everything. What it is, real quick, is simply that come January 6th, if you operate underneath a DOT number, you're going to have to be registered in this clearinghouse, along with any medical facilities that do DOT inspections, any third-party places that do drug and alcohol counseling, all that's going to have to be registered. What will happen is if there is a violation with a driver on his CDL and he loses his CDL for a drug or alcohol violation, it's going to be reported into the clearinghouse. His CDL will be temporarily suspended until he satisfies the requirements of FMCSA on a treatment program. What I like to say is everybody's kind of familiar. If somebody gets a DUI, they may have to go to that Saturday defensive driving class to take type thing. Basically, it's going to be the same way. Their CDL is suspended until they actually complete the requirement and they upload those documents on the clearinghouse. You cannot have a driver operate if they're temporarily suspended until they meet those satisfaction of the federal motor carrier. The other flip side of that is if you are hiring a new driver after January 6th, one of the requirements now, not only running their MVR, you are going to have to run that driver's name, have them sign a release, and run their name through the clearinghouse to make sure they're not on the clearinghouse. I'm going to tell you right now what is going to happen to probably, I might be a little high, but I'm going to say about 90% of companies out there after January. They're going to get a driver. They're going to ask the driver, here, sign this release. I got to run you through the clearinghouse. You know what that driver is going to tell you? What clearinghouse? Well, driver, have you registered? Registered what? The drivers are going to be required to be registered along with your company. It is very simple for the driver. It costs them nothing. They will simply go to the FMCSA/clearinghouse. They're going to go to the driver section. They're going to register. When they're registered one time, they're done for life. They're good.
Do they get a notice of this from the DOT or anything?
I have not seen that because even though this program has been going into place since 2017, The portal just opened up last month. I believe once they're registered, they will get like an email confirmation. I'm not 100% sure on that one. The company, I know I have been in the updates and some of the webinars on that. On the company side is very easy. You go in there, you're going to be asked a little bit of information about your company, the person who's registering, and you'll put in your DOT number, you'll be all set. Now, on a side note, when you go to run these drivers, whether it's a new hire or at the end of the year, you go to run those drivers, what do you think the government wants from you as a company? A little bit of money. So every driver you run is only going to cost you $1.25. Only $1.25. And FMCSA is actually trying to help you because they've offered packages. You can buy blocks of 25 at a time. But smaller companies, it's not going to be that big of a deal. You can buy like a group of 50 or whatever. You can run the query through. So you're going to have to do this on their pre-hire. They're going to sign a release. You'll run them through the clearinghouse. You'll have the notification. You'll put it in their DQ file. Yes, you still have to run the regular MVR with that release. Then, once a year, just like we do on our regular MVR where we run them at the end of the year, and they sign their little sheet on any tickets or accidents, you're also going to have to run them again on the clearinghouse. So, does anybody have any questions on that? There's some information out there on the clearinghouse. If not, you can always contact me over at HB Next. I've got some brochures and business cards around the day. You can just call me or shoot me an email. I'd be more than happy to help you out or try to answer anything that I can on that. CSA is important. It really is. Think about the history of your company. Think about your rates. Think about programs. It's always changing. Think as a company and as supervisors and owners and everything of a company, hey, we're doing okay, but it's the same thing, and I'm still seeing these fender benders. I'm still seeing these problems with hiring. Think of, can we take a different approach? You know, I appreciate everybody having me come in and being able to speak to you. Does anybody have any questions before I let you go?
Can we get a copy of your presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So if you've got a DOT number, then you have to register for the drug clearinghouse program, but only if you're a CDL driver do you have to register?
Correct. So as a commercial carrier operating under a DOT number, you will need to register on the clearinghouse. This is only going to affect a CDL holder. Okay? You will only have to run them on the clearinghouse, typically if it's our Class B, our Class A, or sometimes I'll see a Class C, but he has a hazmat endorsement because of some of my guys that work at the quarries and stuff because they haul explosives like in the pickup trucks. But if you have a commercial license, yes, they have to be run. If you run a fleet vehicle, you just have a bunch of pickup trucks or vans, you would not have to have that driver register on the clearinghouse. If you're operating under a DOT number as the company, yes, but the non-CDL holder, no.
So you might register and then never have to run an actual deal.
Yes, sir. That is correct. If you do not have that CDL holder, just as the DOT company or operating under the DOT number, you want to register. It will not cost you anything to register.
Yeah, but we just need to let because we have a lot of clients that would be DOT, but not necessarily have CDL.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
What if you hire a CDL, someone who has a CDL license, but he's not driving for you and it's not really mandatory that he have that license? You hired him, so you're going to have to do all of this because he has that license.
If you hire a CDL holder, you're going to have to run him through the clearinghouse, whether he is driving for you or not. Kind of a real quick example on that would be you hire a mechanic for a shop. typically your mechanics are going to have a CDL just because they may have to move different equipment here and there, but they're typically not hired as a driver. They're listed as a mechanic. The two things, they're still going to have to run them through the clearinghouse, and you're still going to have them on your random drug policy program. Good questions.
You know, if there's fines associated with if you don't register as a company, because like I said.
Good question. Question is there a fine? Does the federal government want to penalize you if you do not do what they say? Ding, ding, ding. Yes. The fines that I've seen on that so far are starting from $1,000 to $11,000. You know, it's kind of like your MCS 150 and your MCS or your Georgia intrastate registering once a year. You know, if you don't do that, that's $1,000 a day up to $11,000 for that year if you're not registered. Yes, there are fines associated with the clearinghouse. Just real quick on audits, I will tell you typically about 40% of all fines and violations that were discovered on an audit on a commercial vehicle company that we would go in and do, about 40% of all the fines and violations we found is simply because of poor record keeping or lack thereof, or the company just simply didn't know. Company told me, I didn't know I had to have a 3-year motor vehicle accident registry in place. I didn't know I had to have random drug testing, that 10% of my guys also had to be alcohol tested. I didn't know I had to keep my records for one of my commercial trucks I sold. I didn't know I had to keep that on house for a year. I didn't know I had to run a yearly MVR. These simple things that, because we get so wrapped up in our company, in our day-to-day business, that we just kind of overlook and we just lose track of. You know, typically that's what I'm seeing. And then that really rolls down the line and can affect your rates on everything. Good questions. Anything else before I go? All right. I appreciate everybody.
Thank you so much. Very good stuff. He left brochures. I can't encourage you enough to consider reaching out to these guys. I think he ended on the right note because your businesses are complicated and it's hard to keep up with all this stuff. And it's hard to be an expert in all these little things to stay safe and compliant. They can help you with most of these things. They've got really cool software tools. They've got all kinds of training resources. And their people make it their business to stay compliant with OSHA and the federal DOT and the state DOT and all these regulators that you have to interact with on an ongoing basis. We have got some preferred introductory pricing on some of this stuff as a partner of HB Next. They've been in business 20 plus years. They do a ton of work in the construction space. I mean, they can help you source safety people. They can come out to your place and do training. You can go to their place and do training. It's just really customer focused business model. And I think you'd really do yourself a service to just reach out and explore it a little further because they can really help your business. Want to thank everybody for coming out. Want to thank Katie Kamahiva for putting this all together. If it weren't for her and her pleasant disposition, these things wouldn't go as well as they go. So thank you, Katie. Please be on the lookout for our next program. It's on Thursday, December 5th. We're having a very prominent construction attorney come in. They're going to do a mock trial that's going to explore a project claim between a subcontractor and a GC. I've seen this perform for different associations. It's really kind of insightful look behind the curtain. I think it would be, and it's going to, talk to some of the general liability issues and areas where there's a lot of confusion as to how the policy works, whether it'll cover us. So please be on the lookout for that. It's Hudson Parrott Walker. They do a lot of construction litigation around town, not only for clients directly, but also hired by the insurance company to represent construction clients. So you may cross their path at some point, but they do a lot of trial work, and I think it'll be a really neat program. So thanks for coming out. Look for those invitations. as well. And does. We should have that. We do a lot of freaking transportation.
Sure, thank you.
I think I'll give them a hug. Good to see you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate that kind words.
Yeah.
Man. You doing all right?
Yeah, doing well.
You doing all right? Oh, yeah.
Busy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just trying to keep our head above the water, but add more resources. We got a lot of exciting